our session this evening. There we go. So we are now live, and this will be available afterwards on our website as soon as our technology director is able to get it posted. Secondly, wanted to let you know that we deliberately chose a meeting format as opposed to a webinar format tonight, so that as we go later in the presentation, you have an opportunity to ask questions. But for the time being, if you would please put yourselves on mute so that the wonderful ambient background noises that affect all of us are minimized as much as possible. I'd very much appreciate that. And then finally, if you have some questions that you'd like to ask in the middle of the presentation, we are going to have a time for that towards the end. But in the meantime, if you think of something that you just don't want to lose, feel free to put it into the chat window, either to me privately, or you can add it to the chat window to everyone if it's public for that. And we will go through those at the end. But in the meantime, if you would please just put yourselves on mute. So another really fantastic thing we have to offer tonight is that this is the first time Kansas City is able to offer a professional development unit for those who are first-time certification seekers. Now, this is something that IIBA has allowed chapters to begin doing, and there are some conditions that go with that. So we would really appreciate your feedback at the end of this presentation. You can send it to me afterwards, and I'll have my email address up there to help us make this presentation better in the future. Before I introduce our speaker, I feel like I really need to introduce our leadership team. Some of them have already joined, and some of them will be joining us later, but I'm just going to name check them for now. Keith Umstead, our branding director, was responsible for our slideshow this evening. We also have our treasurer, Mark Macias. Kylan Evelson is our technology director. Andrea Walker, our wonderful membership director. Saraswati Subramanian is our secretary. Brian Hadaway is our member at large. Andrea, I can't think of anybody else. Did I miss anybody? I think we've got them all. All right. The next thing I want to do is just give a call out to our sponsor for the meeting, and that is Allied Global Services. And they were there. Awesome. Well, the slide doesn't want to advance. Allied Global Services is a national company for the United States that is offering both IT consulting and staffing. And so far, I don't see their representative here online, but I know that a lot of business analysts in the— Oh, I'm here. George.
Yes,
George.
I've been here the whole time.
Sorry, I didn't see you come in.
You put me on mute, so I was like, okay, she's got it. She's got it taken care of.
Thank you, George.
I'll let you proceed. Nice to meet you all.
George is our representative here, George Saad, and we are so grateful to have Allied Global as a partner tonight. So thank you very much for being here. Please do reach out to me or reach out to George privately if you are local to the Kansas City area and you would like to connect with him. I know that a lot of our business analysts and tech adjacent folks have been furloughed in recent weeks because of the COVID crisis here. So we just all have to stick together and now more than ever be a network for each other. And that's what makes IIBA so great. All of these voices from around the world, if we can be a connection for each other on LinkedIn, we make each other stronger. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker for this evening, who has been wonderfully handling the waiting room while I'm talking. Sharon Weaver is a business owner. She owns Smarter Consulting, which is a SharePoint and Microsoft consulting agency here in Kansas City. And several of her people are on the call tonight. Sharon is also an adjunct instructor at Johnson County Community College here in town. And I first heard her speak at a SharePoint Saturday last year, and then she proceeded to speak at the St. Louis Professional Development Day last fall. And she has graciously agreed to come back and speak to the same topic that she gave at that in St. Louis. She's agreed to give that again tonight, and she's going to be talking about process gap analysis and how it fits into strategy analysis by using a case study from her own examples. So please help me welcome Sharon Weaver. Sharon, I'm about to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Tamara. I'm going to, my buttons just disappeared. Share my screen. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. So like Tamara said, thank you guys for having me. I get so tech heavy sometimes that it's really nice to kind of get back to my roots and talk about more business skills, which is fantastic. I still use them every day, so it's really great when I get to talk about them and share that with other people. Like she said, I am an adjunct professor and trainer. I've been in the IT game for a long time. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I am a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm a Six Sigma black belt, and I'm also BSAC certified, which is basically the certification that was there before the CBAP came out. But I am a certified business analyst as well. And so today we'll be talking about gap analysis. Get over here, right screen, there we go. All right, so the point of a gap analysis is really to kind of figure out where you're at and where you want to go. And so I affectionately term this the grass isn't always greener, because sometimes we think we want to go somewhere, but we need to really understand what that means to get there, and if we're really going to the right place, and making sure that we're go in the right direction and make sure that we understand what the risks and challenges are to get there. The objectives of this particular session or course is basically to understand how to learn how to identify what the business actually needs. So sometimes we understand what we hear, and sometimes people tell us certain things, but really what we want to know is really identifying what the problem is for our clients or for our business people, identifying that, clarifying that, creating requirements from that. And to do that, we use this tool called the process gap analysis or a gap analysis. And the highlights of this objective are to understand the as-is process and to define the to-be process and use that information to determine what those requirements are. More importantly, what is a gap analysis and why do we care? So the Babcock clearly defines a gap analysis as a comparison of the current state and desired future state of an enterprise in order to identify the differences that need to be addressed. And this skill is essential to be able to meet the core functions of a BA role. Long story short, the process gap analysis or a gap analysis helps us to figure out where we're at, where we want to go, and what's in the middle. And the what's in the middle is what becomes a very, very solid point of our requirement gathering process. And this allows us to analyze that information, elicit really clear and concise requirements, facilitate communication with our users, and then also to help translate. Sometimes that's between business IT, sometimes it's between other departments, but it helps us to really understand what's going on. So I'm going to walk through an example in my past of an area where I was brought in to figure out and solve a problem. And I'm going to put that in line with how I used a gap analysis to accomplish this particular task. So when I started with this, the problem was that the client I was working with had an existing software solution, they were using it, but it was not giving them what they needed out of it. And so what they had done is they had actually started a project. They had handed it off to their Six Sigma team. There was a Six Sigma belt that was working the project. They had already defined a lot of things out of it. And now they're just trying to decide what that new software was going to be. So they already went through the process. They already had decided what they wanted, and they already had established a budget of $1.5 million to replace the software. So they've already gone through this, and they already think that they know what they want. So what I say to people, I don't know if I can hide that. What I say to people is to make sure that you pay attention. If you walk into a situation like this, even if it was a situation where nothing had been decided, it doesn't make any difference. We always want to follow the same practice. In this case, I had some really big concerns. My first number one concern was that somebody else had done the original analysis for the process. They left, and I got the project, and they wanted me to make the decisions. So I was basically at the mercy of the person who had been there before. They had already made a decision that to solve the problem was to purchase a new piece of software. And as far as I knew or could find in any of the documentation, there had not been a gap analysis performed or documented. I found this out because the very first meeting I went in, I started asking questions. There was no documentation for this. And when I started asking questions that would be relevant to a gap analysis, that seemed like a very, very new process to them. So it's kind of like, okay, let's be careful about this. So here's some key tips, and this goes back to requirements gathering 101. When we're eliciting requirements, number one, most important, always, always, always do some level of your own discovery. It's not that we don't want to accept that other people have done work and that that work is irrelevant or invalid. It's absolutely, every single piece of information is something that we need to know. But I'm a big believer that whenever you step into a process and you need to understand something, at least do a high level discovery. Don't take everything at its word. I kind of play dumb sometimes a little bit. The reason I play dumb is if you think of it in the framework of you don't know what you don't know, sometimes that's really helpful for getting information out of people. So let's say we go to the board and we start drawing something on the board. And I say, okay, what do you do first? Because I don't know. Even if I have a clue about what that business is, I don't know how that particular end user or that particular client is doing what they're doing. So I get up to the board and I basically say, all right, first, what do you do? And then what do you do? And then what do you do? And I walk through each of those steps as if I didn't know anything about it. That helps me to get information out of them. The next thing you want to do in this is you want to ask lots of questions. And I know as business analysts that we already kind of know that's what we do, right? We are the journalists of the world. We want to sit down and write the who, what, when, why, how, right? We want to know that. But you really do. You want to ask as many questions as you can about this. And when you've asked all of your questions, ask more questions because you probably haven't asked enough questions. And here's the most important part. For requirements, always, 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 always write them down. It's not good enough to have them in your head. It's not good enough to have taken some notes and to try to remember what it was that somebody said. Write everything down, take pictures of whiteboards. Now we're in this great kind of virtual setting where we can do digital things and keep it on software and we can save it out. But always go back and look at that and save it and keep track of it so that you can go back and reference it later. Now, had the person before you done this would be great, right? Because you could simply go back and go through their notes and look and see what they've come up with, and hopefully ask some of your own questions to add on top of this. So then we talk about how can we get that information, and this is where the gap analysis comes into play. So we're trying to figure out how to get this information. We're trying to get these requirements. We're trying to understand this new project or an existing project. And so one of the best ways to do this is to really understand what's happening now, what's the situation now, what's the process now versus where it is that they think they want to go. So I always look at certain things when it comes to this. When we're defining the as-is process or the as-is situation or the as-is software, I want to understand what are they actually doing right now? And a lot of times people will say, well, we have a process documented, or we're doing XYZ, or we're supposed to be doing XYZ. What I really want to know is what are they actually doing? because I say actually because, as we well know, people have documented processes or documented protocols and policies that they're supposed to be following. And that's a lot of times the documentation that they will give you for their as is. And the problem is, what if that documentation is 5 or 10 years old? What if it hasn't been updated in the last few years? What if the company has gone through a major shift? So it's really great to get as is documentation if it exists, but I guarantee you that there will never be a time that that documentation is 100% what they're actually doing, because there's always these little workarounds for everything. So number one, make sure you understand what they're actually doing. And like I said, a lot of times what I'll do is go to a dry whiteboard and I'll say, okay, let's ask about these scenarios. What happens first? What happens next? When do you get involved? Maybe what about what if scenarios? What happens if somebody on your team is on vacation? What happens if they're too busy? What happens if they leave the department, right? These are getting off of our happy paths and understanding when we have alternatives that come up. What does that look like? Do they have any workarounds or temporary processes that we need to be aware of? So maybe, for example, we're like, well, normally we do this, but because Joe is out because he hurt his leg and he's recovering and he's taken some extended time off for the next 6 weeks, we've put in this temporary workaround so that Bob can be doing the work that Joe normally does, right? Or maybe our software expired, and so we're using this other software in between because we haven't figured out what we're going to use. So we're not judging at this point. I want to be really clear. Whenever I do analysis, we're not judging anybody for what they're doing or why. All we want to understand is what is going on. And I put notes next to this that says highlight this. The reason that we want to highlight this is because what we're looking for is the gaps. We're looking for where what they want to happen is not happening. And if you pay attention to these little kind of what ifs and temporary workarounds and things that they've changed, a lot of times that can really point you in the right direction of areas that could be improved, because maybe they're already improving them and they just don't even realize it. Or maybe there's a really easy opportunity right there to gather a requirement. So I always ask it about a lot of things, but the temporary workarounds are the really, really big ones that I like to highlight. Another thing that I like to ask is, what is it that they like about what they're doing right now? If they have software or process, what is it that's working for them? A lot of times they like what they have and there's no reason to change. And I'm a big fan of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Why would we want to change something if it's working for everybody? Maybe what we want to do is take pieces of that are really, really working well and use those in our ultimate solution. We don't want to just change things to change things. We want to understand what it is that needs to be changed. So what do they like about the current process? Make sure you highlight that in your notes. And then another thing is, while you're talking to these users, what would they improve? These are people who do this every day. These are the people who are going to be using it at the end of the day. Why don't we make sure that we find out what it is that they would like to see done? I'm going to guess they probably know more about this than what I know, in terms of they're the ones that do it all day long. Here's a little bit of an expert tip. While you're writing all this down and you're asking about improvements, 9 times out of 10, which we all know this when we've done requirements elicitation, the first thing they do is start being like, well, while you're here, there's this one thing that, if you could fix it, it'd be great. I know this. The minute I get on a phone call with somebody to start asking about requirements, I say, what do you like about the process? And they go, well, what would you improve about the process? Let me tell you, right? They're always quick to jump up and give you feedback for what they don't like. A lot of times people will kind of say, okay, thanks, but they're not going to write that down. Those are some of your most important pieces of information. Don't lose that stuff. Write it down and highlight it. Those are the areas where the business is speaking up and saying, hey, we know what we need. We know what we like. We know what's going to work. Listen to what we have to say. Not saying it's always going to be the right answer, but there's a lot of value in what they're complaining about. Because at the end of the day, change gets the best chance if you're changing away from something that is painful to something that is less painful, right? So we really want to find out where that pain is. Here's another bonus expert tip. When you're doing these sessions and you're meeting with people, make sure that everybody participates. Everybody that participates should be somebody who's responsible, accountable, or a part of that process or solution that you're working on. don't discount the people who work on it every day. Don't discount the people who take the notes. Don't discount the people who manage the people who work on it. Think about anybody who has a say in that. Everything from the people who use it to the people who influence the change. Make sure that as many people can get involved as that as possible. Now, I know that a lot of people will get on me and say, yeah, but Sharon, we can't bring in 10, 15, 20 people because then we'll never get anything done. You don't have to have everybody in one meeting to accomplish this. You can separate them out into small groups. You can meet with people individually. All I'm saying is that make sure you're hitting and touching every single person that is going to have something to do with this, because otherwise you're going to miss some really critical information. So in my case, what happened with this is the as-is situation that we were looking at was that they were using the existing software they had. They were following a basic process. I went in and I said, okay, just like I told you to do. I asked about every scenario. I was like, hey, all right, how does this work? How does that work? Oh, we don't know. We really don't know what our software is capable of. We haven't really done much with it. We've never really been trained on it. Okay, what kind of workarounds and temporary processes do you have? Well, I mean, whenever it doesn't do what we want it to do and we can't figure it out, we just buy another piece of software to fill in the gap, because that was easier than trying to sort it out. We could not figure it out. We clicked on all the buttons, so we just bought other software to fill in the gaps in between. Well, okay, that's really interesting information. That tells me a lot about where they're at right now and maybe some ideas for ways we could very quickly improve it and get some quick wins out of this. So I went on. Okay, what do you like about the current process? Well, we really like that the software that we have is supposed to be the best software on the market. For the most part, it does what we need. The only thing is sometimes it's a little clumsy and it's hard to use. Okay, so if I was to make all your dreams come true, right? I always like talking about perfect world. Like if you had all the money in the world and I could make all your dreams come true, what would that look like? And they were like, well, I mean, honestly, we really like what we've got, but we'd really like it to all be in one application, not be using these multiple applications, maybe some better notifications. And really, most importantly, we'd just like to be able to use it, and we'd like some more training on our software. Okay, so if you think about this, this is my picture. I'm totally confused right now. What I got handed was a project that said they had already decided they needed a completely different piece of software and they were going to spend a bunch of money to buy something. But when I went and had a conversation, I found out their major issues were not around the software. Their major issues were that the software they had was not doing everything they needed. Their major issues were that they weren't trained on the software. And their major issue is notifications? Really? That's it? So I'm a little confused. Okay, that doesn't match up with what I was given at the beginning. So I'm like, all right, we'll take this. So see what happens when you start to really understand what the as-is process is, or the as-is situation is, the as-is scenario. It gives you a lot more information that you might not have gotten had you just walked in and they say, we have money, go help us pick out a piece of software. That's not the same thing. So what we want to do next, we have our as-is. We really understand as best we can what they need right now, what they're doing right now, what they like right now, how it's working right now. Now we want to understand, where do they want to go? So if you think of this in terms of, I live in my house, I've gotten really used to my house, I've gotten comfortable in my house, but we all know what we would change about our house, right? So I know where I'm at right now, but if I was to build a brand new house, right? Now you start dreaming a little bit and you say to them, okay, if you were to build a brand new house, if you were to start over, if you were to do this from scratch, what would that look like? I'm not asking them to make a solution decision. I'm not asking them to tell me what the answer is. I am simply asking them to think about, if you could solve your own problem in a perfect world, what would that look like? Because I'm going to tell you guys, in general, they know. They have a pretty good idea of what they need. These are intelligent people who've been working with this stuff for a long time. All I want to know is what they see that to look like. Once again, our job isn't to judge. Our job isn't to decide yet. Our job is to simply gather that information and to understand what needs to happen. So we start talking about questions like, what do they want the new process to look like? And once again, we're going to go through the exact same thing that we went through before. Ask about every scenario. Okay, so let's sit back and look at this. If we were to do it your way, what would happen first? And then what? And then what? And then who would do which pieces? What would you like to happen if somebody went on vacation? Would you like to have a process that we already know who's going to back it up? Would you like to know what would happen if somebody leaves? Do we need to switch something to role-based applications as opposed to putting individual people's name in there? And then when they transfer out, you have to figure out where their name is and everything. What kind of workarounds would you want to change or eliminate from what you have now? You know, maybe every time somebody goes on vacation, there's one person who knows how to click certain buttons and they're always the de facto backup person. And if they like that, that's great. But what if they don't like that? Maybe if they're like, I'd really like if other people could get trained on this too. So I'm not the only person who has to click the buttons because I'd like to take a vacation sometime too. So ask them, what types of things would they like to see in this new process? Once again, what do they want to keep from the current process? They probably know. They're like, well, we already like this. We're used to it. If you were to build a new house, you're going to probably have elements of the thing that you have now. You're going to feel comfortable with those things. Maybe you would take furniture you're comfortable with. Maybe you'd take some of your books. Maybe you'd make your kitchen look similar to what you have now because you really, really like it, right? Even if you had the chance to build a brand new house, I guarantee you that it's not going to be 100% different because there are elements that you're comfortable with, that you're used to, that you enjoy, that you find value in, that you're going to carry over to that next solution. It's no different when we talk about processes and applications and solving problems. What does that look like? What do they want to keep? What are they comfortable with that's working for them? But also, what do they want to change about it? Right? We already talked about it before and you're like, yeah, but Sharon, you already asked this question. That's okay. We want to ask it again because they're in a different frame of mind. They're in a different reference point. They're thinking about it from kind of a perfect world perspective, not still kind of hammered into where they're at now, which frees them up. And sometimes you're going to see people say the same thing on both sides. And sometimes you're going to see people shift their opinions. One of the reasons I like to do this is because if you can collect the answers on one side and then collect the answers on the other side, you can see if there's consistency in them. If they just kind of flip-flop their ideas, maybe, but if they stay consistent and when you talk about the as-is process, they say, well, we'd like this to change. And then you go to the to-be and you say, what would you like to change? And they say the same thing. It's probably a good sign that that's a consistent thing that might need to happen. So we really want to focus on what is it that they want to keep and what would they like to change. Write it down and highlight it in your notes. Once again, here's another expert tip. Ask about pain points. Yes, again, because guess what? You're like, let me paint this perfect dream picture for you. We're going to build the house of your dreams. We're going to solve all of your problems. While we're talking about that, the first thing you're going to be like, the first thing I want is to never have this color of wall ever, ever again. Because people know what they don't like. They know the things that drive them crazy. They know the things that they're like, I will drop that like a bad habit because I don't need it anymore. So what you really want to pay attention to is while you're talking about where you're taking them, let them go ahead and start giving up some of those things. Also, part of the expert tip in this is that when you start talking about adoption and change management, the faster you can get them to give up some of those old things, the faster you can get that change through and the better they're going to feel about it. So not only is this helping you to write down requirements, but it's also helping them to cope with the change and to adjust to the change. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone. Once again, bonus expert tip, make sure that everybody gets a voice. Once again, they don't have to all be in the same meeting. You don't have to talk to them all at once, but you want to talk to everybody. You really want to know what everybody wants because then when you put it all together, it's going to create this thing that's going to meet the needs across the team. Not saying that everybody's going to get what they want. I'm not saying that everything's perfect, but what we can do is really try to do a good job of understanding what people are trying to accomplish and where they're headed. All right, so what we did is we then did the same thing that I just told you you need to do with this project I was telling you about. So we said, all right, what would you like this to look like? If you had $1.5 million, oh wait, you do. Then what do you want that to look like? What are we spending that money on? How great is this, right? And they said, all we really want is easy to use software that does everything we want it to do and that's got some alerts and got some integration. That's really what they were stressed about. When it all came down to it, that's all they really cared about. That's great for me, right? Those are pretty easy requirements to hit. Now I just got to go figure out how to solve that problem. Once again, we asked about the scenarios. What would you like this to look like? They're like, well, there's so many people doing so many different things and we've got so many different roles and nobody knows what's going on. Really, we just want a simplified process. We want to know that when things happen, they're going to follow one path. They're going to communicate in one way. We're going to understand what's going on. Okay, that makes perfect sense. What happens if somebody's out? What happens if somebody leaves? That's something we talked about in our 2B that was a big concern for them. Well, we just really like a backup plan and maybe some additional users to be trained so that we're not the only people that are doing it. We'd like to share that with other people. Oh yeah, and by the way, did we mention we want training? Every time we had a meeting with them, every single time, they're like, hey, Sharon, write down training, write down training. Write down training. Like, I feel like you're telling me you want training. So, we had training highlighted in every single note. I'm guessing that that's probably a need for them. Another big thing that I asked is, okay, I know you've got some temporary workarounds and some ways that you're doing things that you don't really like. And they're like, yes, we have so many different applications and we have to log into each one every time we want to use it. What would be really nice is if we can't limit it to one application, which we would like to do, but if we can't, can we at least limit it to one login so that everything integrates together and we have single sign-on for it? And I was like, okay, that's great to know, right? This is stuff that's important to them. Are there any current pain points that you have that you're really frustrated with? Hey, we really want training. Like, okay, I got it, right? By this point, if you've had conversations with all these people and you're focusing on where they're headed and what their concerns are, the requirements should write themselves. They're going to come out and they're going to be like, here's the things that you need to be paying attention to. So here's the important part, right? We've gotten all this information. We know where they're at. We know where they want to go. We know what the boundaries to some of that are. But how do we get from where we're at to where we want to go? This is what the gap analysis does. The gap analysis tool allows us to say, we're here and this is what we have and we want to be here and this is what it's going to take to get there and we need to know what the middle is. We all do this every single day. We have everything from I want to go on a vacation, so I'm going to save up X amount of money and here's the things I need to buy at the store to take on vacation with me. Or I'm going to buy a new house and here's the things that we want to do in that new house to make it fit our needs. Or even as simple as I want to go to the grocery store and right now all I have is pasta, but I need to go to the store to buy meat and sauce so that I can have spaghetti, right? We do this every day. We use a gap analysis to solve a lot of our problems. We just don't realize that that's what's happening. So once we've clearly defined the as is, we've clearly defined the to be, what we really want to do is understand what's missing and what needs to change and what can be our biggest impact from the as is to the to be. What we need to do is go back, hey, check it out. My tips are coming in handy. All those places I said, make sure to highlight this. Those are your answers. Those are the gaps. Those are the things that are in the middle. So we're going to go review all those highlighted items and we're going to figure out, okay, based on what we got, what really, really needs to stay from a priority perspective? What really, really needs to change, right? And what are the most painful things that they've identified? Because guess what? Those are also the most important. And in Lean and in Six Sigma and in requirements gathering, we talk about these as our critical to quality items or our CTQs, right? Which turn into requirements. These are the things that we need to understand. What is the gap between as is and to be? It's the things that are the most painful and the most important that has the highest potential to change within the boundaries and the scope that we've defined. What we do is we take that information and we then use that to define our to be, which is our design or our solution, our change management, things like that. So we use this information to build out our requirements. We use this to document We use this to build our change management. And I know that I pulled this out in this particular session because I think it's really important, but don't forget the training. Change management is not complete without training. You can roll out the absolute most crazy awesome thing on the planet, but if people don't know how to use it, it's worthless because all they're going to do is complain, right? So make sure you're documenting it, make sure you have a good change management plan, and don't forget to include the training. All right, so then we get to the analysis, right? We're like, okay, we know what the as is, we know what the to be is. Now, how do we figure out what's in the middle? All right, so we know that originally this project was laid on our laps as a software tool selection project, and we took it at its word, but we went back and we did our own work anyways. So we're going to go with them and say, all right, we think that maybe they need new software to solve their problems. We'll kind of take that as a basic premise. We know what their needs are because we know what the as is and the to be is. So let's go ahead and look at everything. So we did an actual software assessment and a software analysis. We looked at all of the vendors that were available, including the vendor that they have. With the vendor we had, we said, hey, here's the requirements for the software that we're looking to buy. We already have an agreement with you. Would you be able or willing to meet these requirements? We searched out other vendors. We also even talked about building a custom application to meet the needs that were in our requirements that we gathered. So we did this whole analysis to understand what solution would best fit our to be based on the gap from the as is to the to be. We defined that process by documenting what we wanted that to be process to look like, to work to start implementing it, and we worked to start training the users on it. And we highlighted, like I said, our critical to quality areas in this so that we compare that. Once we did our software assessment, we could say, okay, here's the software options we have. Here's what our to be process looks like. How does that all match up together? I know this is going to shock all of you. Okay. We went through this whole process. And at the end of the day, when it was all said and done, we found out that the vendor was more than happy to build us a little bit of options to meet our needs. So we ended up staying with the vendor we already had, using the software we had, maybe buying a few options to add some additional modules and customizations to meet those gaps. They also were more than happy to sell us a packet of training so that all the users knew how to use their software, and we made a few tweaks to the process. And at the end of the day, what this gap analysis gave us was a savings. You know how much it cost? Not a $1.5 million price tag, right? At the end of the day, it actually saved us quite a bit of money. And it turned out it was like less than $300,000 over the course of 3 years to do everything. And that was to keep the existing software they had. So they didn't have to change anything. We just had to make it a little bit better. So at the end of the day, when you're trying to decide how to get from here to there, make sure that you're not focusing so much on the getting there and the what you're solutioning that you don't look at what the gap is in between. Are you guys ready for some quiz to learn, see if you've understood what you learned? Or we can take a few questions before that too if you want. I think Tamara, you're on mute.
Yes, I'm here. And I'm ready to go when you are. Would you like to do some questions first?
Yeah, let's take some questions first, and then we'll do our poll here in a few minutes.
The floor is open. What questions do you have for Sharon?
I don't know if this is a question as much as I've always liked gap analysis, but I can't say I've ever watched something and I just kind of got short training on it and started using it all the time. So I was kind of thrilled when you said we do it all the time, right, in our daily lives. So of course, right, it's a good process. It's a good way to think. So hats off to you for presenting. This is very interesting coverage of this topic.
Thanks. Yeah, I absolutely consider this a critical thinking skill, and critical thinking skills make us all better at what we do.
Anita would like to know, do we have a template? Do you have any kind of a template that new business analysts could use to help guide them in this process?
That is a very good question. I don't, because I've never made one. I think if you follow the steps in this deck, it's about the best I've got.
And we can get that after the presentation, Sharon. If you're willing to put that in a PDF, we will add it to the same spot as our video will be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you could build a checklist off of that of the critical questions to ask.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hey, Sharon.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a template, how did you go about illustrating the gaps between your current and future process?
You mean in terms of presentation to your users?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different PowerPoint presentations that we did in terms of like something similar to this, where we basically would boil it down to, the as is and to be. So you could have the as is on the left and the to be on the right, and show kind of what the high level, where they're at, high level, where they want to go, and then have an image in the middle that basically shows you, here's the things that are missing from going from the left to the right. And you can just kind of show those right down the middle. And then it's really nice because it highlights them really well. We actually did one where we had, so you see this thing that's got like kind of a sharp corner on it. We did one where it had the as is, and then I folded it out in an animation in PowerPoint to the to be, and then I folded it out again in an animation to say the gaps. Very dramatic. I like to be dramatic with my presentations. I mean, seriously, when you're trying to sell things to people and get them to buy off on it, you got to kind of give them a little swagger. So I like the folding out.
Awesome.
Sharon, how do you deal with the objection of, on the course that you described, that's fine, but I need it done in 50 hours and in 2 weeks or something like that. So they want the big bang, but they're only interested in a small engagement.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really back to understanding what the pain point is. So if somebody comes to me and they say, well, I want all this done in X amount of time and X amount of budget, then I'm going to say, okay, let's sit down and talk about what the core of your pain is. Because if the core of your pain can be met within those guidelines, then I'm going to absolutely try to do that. But if the core of your pain cannot be solved in that timeline or that amount of budget, then you just have to be honest about it. And you have to say, here's what it is, here's what you need, and here's what I've come up with as a timeline and a budget. And if you think you can do it better or faster, I'm open to that, and I'm open to suggestions. But I mean, I tell people, it's really funny. I teach a lot of BA classes, and in every single BA class, somebody asks something like that. And I'm telling you right now, to be a BA, you got to have a backbone of steel. Like, you got to be willing to stand up for your requirements, and you got to be able to stand up to what it is you're trying to help them to solve. And they're more than happy to go and drop the price tag or drop the hours, but usually they're not going to solve the pain point they're trying to solve. And you just be honest with that. Be like, here you go, you can do it, but I'm telling you now, you're going to be in pain. And the funny part is, I do this all the time, where I will answer that question for somebody. I will be very honest with them up front. 6 months to a year later, they'll come back and they'll be like, so remember that when you told us that this was going to be more painful and we weren't going to get out of it, and we didn't listen to you? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, so we're in more pain than we were last time we talked to you. And I'm like, no problem. Now let me tell you how much time and how much money it's going to cost to fix that problem. And they're like, all right, let's do it.
Sharon, we've got a couple of questions that have come up in the chat. I'm going to scroll up a little bit. Mary Cummins would like to know if you invest in use cases during this process.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of use cases and personas and things like that. There's actually a tool called Case Complete that I've used for years that's really, really good for doing this exact thing, where basically you can just type in the process that it is and the users and the actors and all of that. And then what's really nice is, once you get that diagram, if you have a diagram for the as is and a diagram for the to be, and you overlap them, you can almost see, where they don't quite match up. So yeah, big fan of use cases, and especially for something like this, that would be a perfect time to use use cases.
Awesome. Case Complete.
Case Complete, man. That I started using it when it very first came out, and I would say out of all of the BA type tools I have ever used, it's one of my very, very favorite, and it will build all the documentation for you.
Is that the name of the company as well, like casecomplete.com, or is it something
No,
else?
I don't remember what I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll look it up real quick. But Case Complete is the software.
We can come back to that as well, but I'm always intrigued in the tools that other business
Serlio.
analysts use.
Serlio software. Serlio.
Serlio. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I've been a big fan for a long time, and it's really just only gotten better and better and better. So yeah, casecomplete.com. You can actually look at it. It's fairly affordable. It's really intuitive, easy to use, works fantastic, builds all your documentation for you. If you're like the only BA on a team, it's fantastic.
I think there's a few of us in that boat. And Adriana would like to know, do you have a set of go-to questions to ask for as is or to be? For your gap analysis sessions, what are some preparation tips to get the most out of each session?
Yeah, so before I go meet with people, and I know this is going to sound a little like I'm flaky about things, but I really, I stand up on this kind of play dumb idea, because when I walk in a room, I really want to empty my brain of all preconceived notions, preconceived ideas, preconceived judgment. So many people are quick to say, oh, I know what you need, right? They say, I've looked at everything and I already know what you need because I've based it off my own experience. And the truth of the matter is, that's a possibility, but the probability is that you're missing some of that picture. So I think more than anything, before I go into any meetings to understand things, I completely empty my brain of any preconceived ideas, notions, or solutions. And I try really hard to play dumb and really understand where they're coming from. Why are you doing what you're doing? What are you doing? How is it working? How is it not working? What do you like? What do you not like? Right? I want to build a relationship with them and what they have going on right now so that I can truly understand what it is they're trying to accomplish.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. I accidentally skipped over Billy's question. He says, in your experience, why is training almost universally mentioned in gap analysis?
Oh, that's a good question. I would probably say it's because when people change things, a lot of times they don't understand why, or they don't understand what to do. Even the most simple, intuitive things a lot of times are confusing, and there's a stress that comes with change. And I think training is the hand that holds you to get from the as is to the to be. And so by implementing training as part of your change management strategy, if you think of it as just a kind person that's kind of showing you the right direction, instead of teaching you how to do something, it's actually training and guiding you to the new process. I just think it helps you to get from here to there, so everybody uses it.
Fantastic. Brian Hadaway suggested use your process documentation to show the differences between the as is and the to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's that. So when we talk about creating, if you create a process diagram for the as is and a process diagram for the to be, if you put those on clear paper and overlapped them, you would see the differences instantaneously, and you can almost take a red marker and draw lines around the areas where they don't line up.
Awesome.
I actually did that on a contract with Sprint.
I believe it. It's a great way to do it.
Because I used Microsoft Visio, because it if you use a certain version or later, it'll enforce BPMN. You can like click the button to check the rule, check to see if your diagram adheres to BPMN rules, and it'll tell you yes it does or no it doesn't. Here's the problems. And it worked really well to, I had like one tab that said, this is the current process. Another tab is this the future process. And I had multiple documents for each different really sub-process of the application. When I first started that, I thought, let's see, what did Brian always tell us about, about understanding the business process?
Yes.
What does Brian tell us? You've got to understand the business process.
You can't do requirements without understanding the process. You just can't. In electronics, they call that hotspots, right? In electronics, what they do is whenever there's a line that doesn't quite connect or it doesn't go where it's supposed to, they highlight that as a potential risk.
And for the newer business analysts, BPMN, Rick, is Business Process Management Notation.
Business Process Modeling Notation.
Modeling notation, thank you.
Yeah, and there's lots of websites and tons of YouTube videos that you can watch to learn it if you don't already know it. And it's just you don't have to know, you don't have to be a master at it. You don't have to know everything. It's like chess. It takes a day to learn, well, maybe not a lifetime to master, but quite a while to master everything.
A minute to learn and a lifetime to master.
Because there's a whole bunch of little bitty details in BPMN that most people really don't necessarily need to know or don't need to know right now. But if you know the basics, it can really help. Now the problem is that you may have to explain it like I did to your business customers. If you use certain symbols, they may ask you, what does that symbol mean? But then I found once I explained it, they're like, oh, thank you, now I understand.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we're about out of time. You ready to do the poll and take our quiz?
Let's do a poll, and then I have one more final thought from Ohm to share with you as well. But let's do that poll first.
All right, guys. So to get our credits for this, for those of you that are trying to get the credits, we did do this more as a classroom learning style, and to go along with that, we have 3 questions at the end of this. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll so that you guys can answer the first question. So the question is, in what situation should you not do a full requirements discovery?
And let's give it maybe about 10 more seconds. All right. So let's see what everybody says. All right. Option A, if requirements exist. 2 people said this. B, if the client states they don't need them. That was a gimme. And yes, you should always do requirements discovery. Sharon, do you want to talk a little bit again about, what happens if requirements already exist and how you manage that?
Yeah, if requirements already exist, that's great because maybe a lot of extra work is done that we don't need to do, but I never, ever, ever not do requirements because of that, because you never know, that person may have not gotten the right information. They may be older than you think. There could be things missing. So I always at least do a high level full requirements no matter what.
Awesome.
All right, let's get to question 2. Oops.
All right, let's try 2. There we go. Takes a bit of coordination. What is the primary purpose of gap analysis according to the BABOK? We'll go about 10 more seconds. Awesome. All right, so let's see what everyone said. All right, 1, to define initial requirements. That's part of it. Sharon, why don't I let you take it from there?
Yeah, so A and C, it does kind of help with, right? So if you're doing a gap analysis, it does help you to define the initial requirements, and it does help assist in the requirements lifecycle management, but that's not the primary purpose. According to the BABOK, the primary purpose is to determine the difference between the current and future state.
As an FYI, this is all described in strategy analysis, in the strategy analysis chapter in the BABOK. Gap analysis in general is only briefly mentioned as one of the very many techniques that you could use. but that is where it is mentioned in the strategy analysis chapter.
All right, and our final quiz question. When should you ask about pain points, i.e. requirements?
All right. Yep, I think we have a runaway here.
Not only do we want to ask about them throughout the entire process, pain points are what gives us the most value. Are critical to quality, are quick wins. They make people happy because we're solving their problem. So yes, absolutely, throughout the entire discovery process and even on, you should always be understanding what your client's pain points are.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Sharon. I want to come back while I'm prepping just the last couple of slides for the evening here to Om's comment. Gap analysis is one of the elements of define the strategy change task in the BABOK, and you've really well explained the gap analysis in process. Have you ever had the opportunity to do that in enterprise analysis and in organizational structure or in infrastructure? Can you speak a little bit to those applications of gap analysis?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit less tangible because of process, you can kind of lay over it. But if you think about it in terms of building a house and the architecture of the differences between the house that you're in versus the house you want to build, you can actually make a list of all of the things that it takes to have the house that you're in, and you can make a list of all the things that it takes to move to the other house. And it's no different. You're looking at what are the differences and what are the gaps from place to place. I have definitely used a gap analysis more times than I care to count, especially being a black belt. I would say it's probably one of our most frequent go-to tools in enterprise analysis and strategy is, where are we at and where do we want to go and what's it going to take to get there?
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. I'm going to share my screen one last time here to show you a couple of remaining slides. Whoops, one moment. Can everybody see my screen now? Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. For those of you who are seeking your first certification, I mentioned at the very beginning of our discussion tonight that this is the first time we've been able to offer a full professional development hour for one of our chapter meetings. For those of you who already have your certification and are just renewing it, your chapter meetings always count towards that, and you are and should be logging that time in your IIBA profile on IIBA.org all the time. For those of you for whom this is brand new, here's where you go. From your professional development profile, you will go into you'll go into a new professional development item, and that is one of the categories. You'll select chapter event, and this is all of the information you will need. We will have both the presentation and the slides available to you and all of this information after the meeting. I will be sending an email out to everyone who came this evening so that you can claim that credit, and I will be your point of contact for that development hour. A reminder for those who are coming next month, one moment, had to find my mouse. Next month, and I just confirmed this last night, we will be having Angie Weller from the Des Moines, Iowa area. She's going to be talking to us about a day in the life of an Agile BA. Now, I just confirmed this information last night, so I don't have all the Eventbrite information up yet, but look for that coming soon. And finally, especially for those of you who are local to Kansas City, but for any of you who are currently floating between chapters and haven't found a home, please do consider joining us here in Kansas City. Our annual membership is $40 for new members and $30 for renewing members. You also need to be an international member as well, and at this point it's paid in 2 separate fees. But the couple of big benefits besides this great camaraderie and the training sessions that we are going to be having more frequently now is that we've actually added a Slack team, and it is for members only. So for those of you who would like to hang out and ask about what templates do you use and how do you, how can I prepare best for this solicitation session, or ask about problems that you're having relating to certain stakeholders or identifying who they are, come hang out with us in Slack. There's people there all the time who would be glad to help. And with that, I am going to stop this recording and say anyone who would like to stick around